Of Remembrance Committee, I would like to welcome you to the 23rd Annual Days of Remembrance commemoration on the University of Utah campus. Before I introduce our speaker this evening, let me thank those who made all this possible. They include the committee itself, and I would single out Leo Leckie, Harris Lenowitz, as working very hard to put all this together. Also the United Jewish Federation of Utah. But above all, the Office for Diversity on campus. We have worked with 3 Associate Vice Presidents of Diversity over the last 23 years, and they all gave us unstinting support. And now we are delighted to work with the 4th Associate Vice President, who has just come into office, Octavio Villalpando. Unfortunately, he was not able to make it here this evening, but he assures us of his strong support. I'd also like to mention several upcoming events that will bring the Days of Remembrance to an end. Tomorrow, April 13th, in the main auditorium of the Salt Lake Public Library, the state observance of the Holocaust Remembrance Day will take place. And as usual, it will include a proclamation from the governor and the lighting of a candle by a survivor. In addition, this year, a number of World War II veterans will be present to be honored. Then on Sunday, April 15th at 4:30 p.m., in the social hall of the Jewish Community Center, a feature film will be shown, Janusz Korczak. Korczak was a doctor, a teacher, and a writer who directed the orphanage in the Warsaw Ghetto. He found out that the children in his care were going to be murdered, and although he could easily have escaped, chose instead to remain with his charges until the end and accompanied them to Treblinka. Our keynote speaker this evening is Professor Edward Westerman. He teaches military history at the United States Air Force Academy and is a colonel in the United States Air Force. He earned his master's degree at Florida State University, his bachelor's degree at the Air Force Academy, and his PhD at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill under the direction of the Dean of World War II historians, Gerhard Weinberg. He was also a Fulbright Fellow at the Free University of Berlin. He has published several prize-winning articles and 2 books, one called Flak, German Aircraft Defenses, 1914 to 1945, and most recently, Hitler's Police Battalions Enforcing Racial War in the East, which has gotten excellent reviews. He's got a new project he's working on dealing with largely American reporters and diplomats in Nazi Germany in the 1930s and up until the war, looking at how what their impressions were of the regime, its policies, and so on. In addition to that, being a scholar and a teacher, he is also on active duty. And in 3 weeks, will leave for Afghanistan. Tonight, he will speak on the theme of the culture of the German police, which enabled them to murder with impunity. The title of his address is Annihilation, the German Police and the Conduct of Genocide. Please join me in welcoming Professor Westerman.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here tonight, although I have to say, coming from the Air Force Academy, that I had a little trepidation. The teams that we've sent into Utah over the past couple of years haven't done too well here. They come back to Colorado a little bit worse for the wear. So hopefully that won't be the case tonight with my discussion. I also would like to thank Ron. I'd like to thank Leo Leckie. I'd like to thank the selection committee and the university in general for the very fine welcome that I've received here and the opportunity to speak to you all today on a topic for the next hour or so that I feel is extremely important to understanding things about how people become socialized, as we all are in one way or another, and then how that socialization process can be misused in the worst case. Now, I'm going to do something that I never like to do with my students. But I'm going to go ahead and try this. So I guess we've got that works, and I think I've got one more switch. How many PhDs does it take to turn on a light, right? Okay, great. Thanks, Ron.
At least two.
Christmas Eve, 1941, was particularly cold for those serving on the Eastern Front. But for the men of the 3rd Company of Police Battalion 322, the evening offered a chance to celebrate as a group indoors away from the frigid weather. At the start of the evening's festivities, the men gathered around a Christmas tree, enjoying the soft light cast by the candles adorning the branches. A senior police sergeant began the festivities by reading a poem that he had composed expressly for this gathering. After the poem was finished, the company commander, Lieutenant Gerhard Riebel, moved forward to address the group. The men probably expected their commander, a man who at one time had intentions of becoming a Protestant theologian, to offer a prayer or words of encouragement to bolster the spirits of a unit that had spent the last 5 months conducting operations in the East. In fact, Riebel had prepared a homily for his men. However, his words did not highlight the virtues of charity, forgiveness, and redemption. Instead, Riebel spoke to his men of, quote, the necessity of the battle between Germandom and Jewishdom that justified the sacrifices made by men separated from their families in the, quote, great contest between two opposing worldviews. Riebel's words apparently had the desired effect, as the unit diarist made note of the, quote, good spirits of the men and the fact that the celebration lasted until the early hours of Christmas Day. Riebel's words concerning the battle between Germandom and Jewishdom were not simply the empty platitudes of a commander who was parroting the orders of his superiors or the propaganda slogans of the Third Reich. He and the men of his company had done much to translate words into actions during their stay in the East. As a policeman of Police Battalion 322 crossed into Russia in the summer of 1942, they wasted little time in translating racial theories into practice. Within the first week of their arrival, they conducted quote-unquote Jewish actions, resulting in the abuse of the local population and the murder of alleged looters and weapon owners. July proved a deadly month for many who came into contact with these policemen, but it merely provided the baptism of fire for a unit that would cut a bloody path from Bialystok to Smolensk between July 1941 and May 1942, leaving 11,000 men, women, and children dead in their wake, including 9,000 Jews. On August 9, 1942, Riebel's company undertook a quote-unquote evacuation action of all Jews in the town of Belyovitsy. The town's Jewish men between the ages of 16 and 45 were placed in a temporary holding camp, while the other men, women, and children were transported by truck back to Kobrin with only the possessions they could fit into suitcases. Early the next morning, Riebel's men executed 77 of the Jewish men in the holding camp. The men were forced to lay face down in a long ditch as individual policemen stood over them and fired a round into the back of each victim's head. Only 4 days later, the company embarked upon another Jewish action against the Jews of Nurav Kamala. As in the case of Belyovitsy, the unit gathered 259 women and 162 children for transport to Kobrin. However, they broadened their charter by executing the town's entire Jewish male population, ranging in age between 16 and 65. The evening following the executions, the company assembled around a campfire and enjoyed a special ration of beer, an event described by the unit diarist as a quote-unquote cozy get-together. The decision to execute all the adult males from Nurav Kamala signaled an important escalation in the severity of the campaign, which now encompassed all adult males, even those of advanced age. The escalatory spiral of brutality, however, was not at an end. Only 2 weeks later, the company murdered 330 Jews from the Minsk ghetto, including 40 women. The ostensible reason for the inclusion of these women involved their failure to display the yellow Star of David on their clothing. The inclusion of women as victims marked a further intensification of brutality in the Third Reich's crusade in the East. As the policemen of Police Battalion 322 celebrated Christmas, they had participated in the full spectrum of security, pacification, atrocity, and reprisal actions conducted by German SS and police forces on the Eastern Front. Their victims included the entire range of National Socialist, racial, political, and social enemies, including Jews, prisoners of war, communist functionaries, vagrants, Russian civilians, partisans, and suspected partisan supporters. The actions of Police Battalion 322 demonstrated the brutal and atavistic nature of the Nazi campaign on the Eastern Front. Riebel certainly exerted a significant influence on the men under his command, and his actions and exhortations were without a doubt critical in promoting the unit's murderous activities. The 27-year-old Riebel had impeccable Nazi credentials. He joined the party in the SS in the spring of 1933, attended the elite SS leadership school, and subsequently entered the Order Police as a lieutenant. The question remains, was Gerhard Riebel a sadist or an ordinary man operating in extraordinary circumstances? Or was he a true believer, following the dictates of a Nazi conscience with its own ethical and moral standards? Many in this audience will be familiar with the debate between Christopher Browning and Daniel J. Goldhagen concerning the portrayal of the actions of Police Battalion 101 in occupied Poland. In his highly influential work, Ordinary Men, published in 1992, Browning examined the actions of a group of largely middle-aged police reservists and found their behavior motivated less by ideological hatred or fanatical adherence to National Socialism than by their concern for acceptance and conformity within the group, respect and deference for authority, and, last but not least, desire for career advancement. In contrast, Goldhagen published Hitler's Willing Executioners in 1996, in which he concluded that an eliminationist anti-Semitic German political culture provided the framework and was the, quote, primary mover of both the Nazi leadership and ordinary Germans in the persecution and extermination of the Jews, and therefore was the Holocaust's principal cause, end quote. Goldhagen's use of the term ordinary Germans reflected his belief that, quote, being ordinary in Germany that gave itself to Nazism was to have been a member of an extraordinary lethal political culture, end quote. At its core, the ensuing debate revealed a fundamental point of contention concerning the issue of human agency and motivation. Similar to earlier debates about the role of nature or nurture in shaping human development and behavior, the Browning-Goldhagen exchange provided a dipolar view of German perpetrators and their participation in annihilation. For Browning, situational factors explained how, quote-unquote, normal middle-aged men could be ultimately pushed to the dark side, in the same way that Anakin Skywalker gradually transforms into Darth Vader. In contrast, Goldhagen identified an embedded dispositional trait within the German body politic that provided the catalyst for annihilation, not only among the ranks of the police, but within German society as a whole. In this view, eliminationist anti-Semitism constituted a type of genetic marker embedded in the historical DNA of German culture. The scorecard in this debate revealed a split decision, in which the reading public made Goldhagen's work a national bestseller, while the academic community almost unanimously sided with Browning. It is my contention that the transformation of the police from public servants to executioners resulted in large part from the creation of a specific organizational culture and shared organizational ethos within the entire Nazi SS and police complex. In his path-breaking work, the social psychologist Edgar H. Schein defined organizational culture as the, quote, basic assumptions and beliefs that are shared by members of an organization, that operate unconsciously, and that define in a basic, taken-for-granted fashion an organization's view of itself and its environment. In short, organizational culture sets the boundaries for accepted behavior, establishes institutional goals, and defines the standards of group membership. Whether in the police, the military, or the corporate world, the shaping of a specific organizational culture requires time and effort. It is initially an incremental process, but once firmly established, a given unit's organizational culture becomes self-perpetuating and acquires a resistance to change. An organization's culture is formed and defined by the values, rituals, and patterns of behavior of its members. The degree of difficulty associated with changing an organization's existing personality is a function of several factors, including leadership, the background and expectations of the membership, and the mechanisms available for rewarding or punishing specific behaviors. In the case of the first, contemporary research demonstrates the critical role of leadership in defining the organizational culture of law enforcement agencies. Schein contends that it is leadership that embeds and transmits culture to the organization's members and acts as the key mechanism in the creation of an institutional identity. In fact, examples abound of city governments hiring a new police chief in order to bring about fundamental change in police departments that appear to have departed from their charter to protect and serve, with the Los Angeles Police Department providing one of the most recognizable examples. Another study of police organizational behavior described leadership as the glue holding all parts of the organization together through the propagation of a shared vision. Without a doubt, Reich leader of the SS and chief of the German police, Heinrich Himmler, and the chief of the Order Police, Kurt DeLuga, shared a vision of the police and expended substantial effort in promulgating this vision among the members of the organization. As Hitler embarked upon his quest for an empire in the East, the Order Police battalions became a special target of Himmler's efforts and a ready instrument for the conduct of annihilation. Indeed, two dominant characteristics within the organizational culture of the police offer strong evidence for explaining the actions of the police battalions on the Eastern Front. First, the militarization of the police constituted a central objective of the leadership from the initial National Socialist seizure of power until the ultimate collapse of Hitler's thousand-year Reich. The concept of militarization was not simply limited to the establishment of a hierarchical police organization with military capabilities, but also encompassed a specific worldview that married the concept of military duty with absolute obedience and the vision of a higher purpose. Second, after the unification of the Order Police under the command of Himmler in June 1936, the police leadership increasingly pursued efforts to inculcate the quote-unquote political soldier with National Socialist values in a process of merging the police in a psychological and physical sense with the Schutzstaffel, or SS. As in the case of any large organization, it is impossible to achieve a homogeneous and unified body that thinks and acts completely alike in consonance with a shared corporate mindset. However, it is equally clear that the dominant organizational culture of a particular institution plays a vital role in establishing the parameters of both desired and accepted behavior to guide the actions of individuals. Likewise, the dual initiatives of militarization and the merging of the police with the SS go far to explain the manner in which individual policemen and the police battalions were shaped into instruments of annihilation. At this point, I would like to provide some specific examples of the socialization process pursued by the senior SS and police leadership to shape the organizational environment within the police. For his part, Himmler established his strategic vision for the police upon his appointment as chief of the German police. The selection of Himmler provided evidence of Hitler's desire to see the police merged with the party soldiers, the SS, in both an organizational and philosophical sense. For his part, Himmler made his expectations for the police absolutely clear in his opening remarks. Quote, "We are a land in the heart of Europe, surrounded by open borders, surrounded in a world that is becoming more and more Bolshevized, in which the Jew in his worst form increasingly takes control through the all-destructive tyranny of Bolshevism. We have to expect that this battle will be a battle of the generations, the primeval contest between men and subhumans, which in its contemporary form is the battle of the Aryan peoples against Jewry and its organizational manifestation, Bolshevism," end quote. Himmler's words left little doubt as to his own views on the future mission of the police, and he undertook a number of symbolic and practical steps to ensure the transformation of the police into trusted agents of the regime and political soldiers. At the symbolic level, the Nazi government had already succeeded in bringing their message to the police. One manifestation of the bond between the Nazi Party and the police involved the introduction of the Hitler salute for the police. Unlike the Wehrmacht, the police received the distinction of using the Nazi Party salute instead of the traditional military salute. Additionally, the entire civil service, including the police, joined the Wehrmacht by taking a personal oath of allegiance to Hitler after August 1934. In terms of organizational culture, the significance of these measures extended beyond mere formalism. The privilege of using the Hitler salute and an oath of loyalty to the person of the Fuhrer by themselves did not make true believers out of the police, but they represented two powerful symbols of the organization's allegiance to the National Socialist state and its leader. In another example, Hitler awarded unit flags to the police in the Blood Banner ceremony during the Nuremberg Party rally in 1937. In this ceremony, Hitler grasped the unit colors of the police with one hand, while holding the Blood Banner carried by the Nazis in the abortive beer hall putsch of November 1923 in the other hand. At this ceremony, Hitler exclaimed, quote, "The German police shall be brought together more and more in a living connection with the National Socialist movement, which not only politically represents Germany today, but symbolizes and leads it," end quote. With the award of SA and SS-style flags and standards to the police, Hitler intended to demonstrate the blood bond between the party, the SS, and the police. After taking charge of the police, Himmler also pursued several initiatives designed to demonstrate the merging of the SS with the police. These measures included the authorization for SS personnel serving in the police to wear the SS runes and to carry the SS sword. The display of the SS runes on a policeman's tunic or the wearing of the SS sword provided inferential evidence of the racial and political sympathies of the specific individual and acted as visible symbols of the special status enjoyed by the SS within the police. In another measure, policemen who qualified as party old fighters, those who had joined the party before January 30th, 1933, received authorization to wear the honor chevron of the Nazi Party on the sleeve of their uniform jacket. In addition, policemen accepted into the SS received an SS rank corresponding to their police grade. Admittedly, the reaction of individual policemen to SS titles, the SS runes, the honor chevron, and the sword might vary from envy to disinterest. However, the presence of these symbols and the distinction implicit and even explicit in their wear sent an unambiguous message to the rank and file concerning the larger organization's values, objectives, and ideals. Himmler's and DeLuga's efforts also encompassed the recruitment and transfer of the party soldiers from the Sturmabteilung SA or brown shirts and the SS into the ranks of the police. The incorporation of members of the party's paramilitary organizations served the twofold purpose of, on the one hand, reinforcing the militarization of the police and strengthening the organization's identification with the political and racial views of National Socialism. More significantly, the leadership and men of the SA numbered some of the most willing instruments of anti-Semitic activities in the pre-war years. In the state of Prussia alone, 10,000 members of the SA and SS had joined the ranks of the police and police administration by November 1934. In addition, local police authorities received instructions, quote, to take up their advertising duties and endeavor to promote a constant and effective recruitment campaign for the police as well as for the SS, end quote. Himmler's expectations included the identification of suitable Hitler Youth members as well as those young men who had completed their preparation exams for entrance into the University Abitur. This latter group had the opportunity to submit a joint application for entry into Police Officer Candidate School and the SS, with the added privilege for applying to acceptance into the elite SS leadership schools. What I'd like to do now is depart a little bit from the text because I find that some of the symbols, if we show some slides here, I can make this maybe a little bit clearer, that a picture's worth 1,000 words. This is a notional depiction of what I would consider to be the normal boundaries of accepted police behavior. When you start moving into the yellow region, maybe a policeman threatens somebody, potentially pushes somebody. You're starting now into a gray zone of activity, of abuse or police brutality. Certainly by entering into physical abuse, we consider that policeman has crossed the line. Now, how does this look notionally under National Socialism? One of the first things you'll see is that green area has shrunk down. And it shrunk down for a couple of reasons. The range of accepted behaviors has increased, but the people who are actually protected by the police, the Aryan community, if you will, has also decreased. In other words, now, those persons who are considered asocial, those persons who are Jewish, there's a large group of folks that are now outside the protection of the police. And as we see into the war years, what happens is physical abuse and intimidation become the rule of the day. Even prior to the war, when you think about some of the actions of Kristallnacht and some other actions in the period. And by the war itself, murder has become within the acceptable limits of police behavior. Picture here showing on the left Heinrich Himmler and Kurt de Luge, the chief of the Order of Police and the head of the SS. Richard Breitman called Himmler the architect of genocide. One might, in my mind, make that plural. Promoting the martial ideal. How do you do it? How do you create a martial ideal for the police? Well, for example, you give police training in the use of heavy weapons, machine guns. You have precinct police who are doing tactical exercises. And so they're not out there learning how to apprehend a criminal. They're out there learning how to position platoons, move for military actions to take objectives, for example. You start a propaganda campaign which shows the police in their role as precinct policemen, but also as men who are sent to fight the war. You see those pictures then translated into action, a picture that could have been represented 1,000 times on the Eastern Front. You see the formation of the SS Police Division with heavy artillery and, in this case, tanks. You see the award of military awards and party awards to policemen. Now, this use of ceremony is also another powerful method for being able to inculcate organizational culture. This is in Austria after the Anschluss, the annexation or incorporation of Austria into the Third Reich. And what you see here on the right is Heinrich Himmler, the police making that oath, no longer to the state, but to the person of Adolf Hitler. You see the police marching by the most sacred shrine to National Socialists in Munich, the Feldherrnhalle, or the place where they buried those persons who had died in the abortive beer hall putsch in 1923. Again, the symbolism here as the police tied to the martyrs of the party. Another case of which you see in Berlin, where you have a memorial at the Postweserplatz You have a memorial to the police who fell, quote unquote, along with those members of the party, the SA in particular here. And so again, the idea is the identification of the police with the sacrifice of the party, and that those two organizations share a common heritage. You also have, this is not the, the joke is, you want to find a policeman at 6 in the morning, where do you go? The donut shop, right? Well, one of the things that Himmler was very concerned about is his policemen weren't going to be the donut shop physique guys. The idea of sport and athleticism and also physical physique was extremely important to him. And by him appearing at these, not only did he himself pursue the SA sport badge, but by himself appearing at these games, having these annual games, you're reinforcing again an image of the police that he is trying to create. How do you merge the SS and police? Well, one of the ways, and I know this will be very difficult to see, I talked about the SS runes. Those are policemen wearing it on their tunic, right, as a badge of honor. You also see these policemen who are given the privilege of wearing their military decorations as well, something that was not allowed under Weimar. This is a particularly interesting image in my mind. It came out in postcards and posters, and what you have is you have the police crest here on the left, and you have a policeman with a rifle, Soviet tanks scattered in the back, you have an SD man here, and the SS runes here, the police at the front, or the police in combat might be the better translation here. So what you're also seeing now is not only an identification of the police with the SS, but the identification of both those organizations being soldiers, political soldiers, if you will, in this battle. By the start of the war, Himmler's strategy appeared to be working, as demonstrated by the actions of individual policemen. I've already discussed the actions of Gerhard Riebel's unit, but did Riebel represent the organizational ideal for the Order Police, or was he an aberration? As Christopher Browning demonstrated, there certainly were policemen in Police Battalion 101 who refused to directly participate in murder. Were there other policemen who refused to cooperate in the prosecution of the Third Reich's racial and political policies? And how did the organization deal with that dissent, or that non-cooperation? Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, is in many respects emblematic of the radicalization of National Socialist racial policies aimed at Germany's Jewish population. Reich propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels sent the signal for the start of the countrywide pogrom during a speech on the night of November 9, 1938, commemorating the failed beer hall putsch of 1923. Subsequently, members of Nazi Party organizations, including the SS, the SA, and the Hitler Youth, murdered scores of Jews, arrested and confined some 26,000 Jews to concentration camps, destroyed over 7,000 Jewish businesses, and set fire to almost 200 synagogues. In addition to party organizations, the police proved instrumental as silent accomplices in the death and destruction visited upon Germany's Jewish population. The police in Rudesheim simply looked away during the destruction of the local synagogue and the physical abuse of the town's Jews. In another case, a Jewish doctor sought refuge with a non-Jewish German friend, telling her, quote, "They're hunting us down like rabbits. They made me run halfway down the Kurfürstendamm and yelled after me, 'Jewish swine, mass murderer, drop dead.' She then responded, 'And the police?' To which he replied, 'They just looked on. They let anything that's on fire burn and anyone killed who's supposed to be killed.'" End quote. If Kristallnacht exposed the true face of the Nazi regime and the complicity of the police in this campaign of abuse, arson, and murder, one policeman in Berlin remained undeterred in his duty to uphold the rule of law in the face of mob violence. As fires blazed in Jewish synagogues throughout Germany, Police Lieutenant Wilhelm Creutzfeldt, the head of a precinct in central Berlin, prevented a group of Nazi instigators from setting fire to the famous New Synagogue in the Oranienburger Straße. The 57-year-old Creutzfeld, a policeman since 1907, defended his actions based on the historical and architectural significance of the building. On the following day, however, Wolf Heinrich Graf von Helldorf, the police president of Berlin and a longtime Nazi activist, verbally reprimanded Creutzfeld for obstructing a spontaneous, quote, display of the people's indignation against the Jews. At first, Creutzfeld experienced no ill effects from his actions, but with the outbreak of war in September 1939, he lost his position as precinct chief and received a series of transfers and complained of being constantly watched by Nazi policemen. In another example, Gendarmerie Sergeant Hahn prevented ethnic German auxiliaries from abusing and murdering Polish citizens in the city of Pelplin in October 1939. When told that the auxiliaries were acting on Himmler's orders, he replied that this did not interest him in the slightest, as he took his orders from the town's mayor. In the end, however, both the mayor and his gendarme received the message as to whose authority was greater. When the auxiliaries returned with security service or ST support the next day and then undertook their duties. In the end, the organization's goals trumped the authority of this gendarme, no doubt providing a clear object lesson to other policemen who participated in this action or heard about it later. Likewise, Gendarmerie Sergeant Karl Kahne received orders to participate in a special mission, Sondereinsatz, involving the arrest of a priest and a former mayor from an area under German control. Watching his prisoners pack their bags, he remarked, quote, "I can't watch these types of things over the long run," end quote. After the operation, in a summary report, Kahne's superior described him as a, quote, conscientious and sober man who is not yet ready for the demands of special mission, end quote, and decided to transfer him without prejudice from these duties. The cases of Creutzfeld, Hahn, and Kahne demonstrate that despite the efforts and ambitions of Himmler and DeLuga to instill their own vision of the political soldier within the police, not all policemen were willing to accept the extreme implications of this philosophy. Still, in Creutzfeld's case, the organization identified him as a nonconformist, removed him from his leadership position, and isolated him from his fellow policemen through a series of transfers. In Hahn's case, the organization itself overruled his efforts to prevent murder. Finally, Kahne was moved into a position where he could still play a role even if he was not yet ready for the demands of special missions. If the actions of some policemen demonstrated reluctance or even opposition to the organizational goals of the police, then there were far many more who embraced these goals and came to epitomize the National Socialist ideal. In the case of the police battalions, Himmler and DeLuga repeatedly emphasized the special nature of these formations and their status, and stressed that the men of the police battalions were not only police soldiers, but political soldiers, whose police identities were inextricably tied to a martial character and the political and racial aims of the Nazi regime. DeLuga provided unequivocal guidelines to the police battalions in orders stating that the objective of the combat on the Eastern Front was not to, quote, overcome the enemy, but rather to ensure his, quote, unconditional annihilation. The activities of the police battalions on the Eastern Front clearly demonstrate the success achieved in turning these units into instruments of unconditional annihilation. In the case of Police Battalion 310, the unit's 3rd Company, under Police Captain Werner Puls, proved especially adept at both large-scale and small-scale atrocity during the fall and winter of 1942. In the early morning hours of 23 September, Puls's company surrounded the Belarusian village of Soblochi as part of a major anti-partisan operation. The policemen separated the villagers into 3 groups and led them away to execution sites where 285 men, women, and children, according to Puls, quote, met their well-deserved fate, end quote. In fact, the executions bothered Pools far less than the problems associated with the care and transport of the villagers' confiscated livestock and grain supplies. Pools concluded his report with the remark, quote, "The detail of qualified personnel is necessary for the care of the, so to speak, now ownerless cows, in particular for the milk cows," end quote. It appears initially incredible that a report concerning the cold-blooded murder of almost 300 men, women, and children should end with an implied joke about, quote, "so to speak, now ownerless cows." It was, however, perfectly apt from Pool's perspective. For in his belief system, the executed Russian peasants were indeed worth less than their livestock. Werner Pools was in fact the ideal of the policeman espoused by Himmler and Deluga, and the prototypical police soldier or political soldier. Born in 1915, he joined the Hitler Youth in 1931, the SS in 1933, and the party in 1935. He attended the elite SS leadership school in Braunschweig and took part in an SS training course at the Dachau concentration camp. During the 2 weeks following the Soblochi massacre, his company conducted small-scale sweeps in the surrounding countryside and murdered 14 men, 50 women, and 81 children in 5 separate instances. The justification given for the execution of the majority of these victims was simply the phrase Ostmenschen, literally Eastern people. It is important to note that these victims were not identified as Jews, but were murdered based on their Slavic heritage alone, an indication of the broader objectives of annihilation associated with the Nazi campaign in the East. If Pool set the standard for his unit, he was not the only person responsible for influencing the actions of his men. The words and actions of one of his platoon sergeants, Helmut Schmidt, provide additional details of the organizational atmosphere within this company. Born in 1911, Schmidt joined the SA and the Nazi Party in 1933. In his 1961 testimony, Schmidt's brother-in-law, Fritz Lange, recounted statements made by Schmidt during a home leave during the war. After having several drinks, Schmidt told Lange he had participated in the execution of Jews in Poland. Reacting to Lange's expression of disbelief, Schmidt reportedly exclaimed, quote, "The Jews were not people, but a danger to the German folk," end quote. Lange also recalled his brother-in-law's stories of how mothers often pleaded for their children's lives. According to Lange, Schmidt described how he purposefully executed the child of one such mother so that she might watch her child die. He then told Lange, quote, "We know no mercy." The activities of the 3rd Company of Police Battalion 91 offer another example of active support for the Third Reich's racial policies. Police Captain Wilhelm Ahrens took command of the company in late 1941. Born in 1911, Ahrens joined the police in April 1932 and rose through the enlisted ranks before receiving his commission as a lieutenant in August 1936. He joined the party in 1937 and the SS in 1940 and had participated with police forces in the occupation of the Sudetenland and the invasion of Poland. As a career policeman with combat experience and ties to the party and the SS, Ahrens offered another example of the ideal political soldier. In fact, Ahrens provided proof of his commitment during an action in the Krinky ghetto with the aim of eliminating, quote, "old and infirm Jews" on April 1st, 1942. After receiving his orders, Ahrens notified his men of a confiscation and search action planned for the following day. This was to be the 3rd mass execution conducted by Ahrens' company in the first half of the year. The company assembled early the next morning and climbed aboard trucks for the short journey to the town. The field kitchen traveled with the unit and provided coffee to the men after their arrival. Ahrens then informed his platoon leaders of the objective of the action, including orders to search the entire Jewish ghetto for food stores and scarce goods, as well as the execution of all old and infirm ghetto inhabitants. The platoon leaders were given the option of executing these quote-unquote useless bread eaters either in their apartments or handing them over to an execution squad. Subsequently, Ahrens informed the ghetto commandant as well as the Jewish council of his mission. The policemen entered the ghetto and swarmed into the apartments. Shortly thereafter came sounds of heavy shooting as the policemen executed Jews in their homes and on the streets. One policeman testified that Police Sergeant Wilhelm Gelb especially distinguished himself during the operation. Gelb's reported actions included an incident where an old Jew told him that he was sick, whereupon Gelb ordered the man to turn around and shot him on the spot. In addition to those killed in the ghetto, Ahrens ordered the 30 Jews brought to the collection point be locked within the synagogue. He then directed his men to toss a bundle of hand grenades into the synagogue, resulting in the deaths of these remaining Jews. It is important to note that the action, originally aimed at the old and the infirm, escalated into a general free-for-all at the hands of the policemen that claimed the lives of numerous Jews. In fact, the ghetto commandant complained that the action had cost him some of his best craftsmen. In other words, some policemen chose to kill persons when they did not have to, and they did so in the most brutal fashion. When questioned after the war as to why the men of Police Battalion 91 acted as they did, one former member of the unit, Alfred Metzger, replied, quote, "A bad spirit ruled the company. The company was brutalized by its experiences, especially the senior non-commissioned officers," end quote. Metzger's words reflect the existence of an organizational atmosphere within the company that established the killing of Jews and other quote-unquote undesirables as the group norm. 2 decades after the event, Metzger clearly recognized that this was a bad spirit. Likewise, his comment about the role of the senior non-commissioned officers in establishing an attitude of brutalization within the company once again highlights the important contribution by all levels of police leadership in establishing brutality and atrocity as group standards. If the police battalions proved the most adept at mass murder, other organizations within the Order Police provided a key contribution in a cumulative strategy of annihilation in the East, including the rural-based gendarmerie. Reinhold Hein, the head of a gendarmerie post in the Belarusian town of Mir, provides another example of a policeman perhaps best described as a model of the obedient civil servant. In command of 12 German gendarmes and regional Belarusian police forces, Hein exercised absolute control over the actions taken by German and indigenous policemen within his jurisdiction. A career policeman in his late 40s, Hein arrived in Mir in the wake of a rampage by Wehrmacht soldiers that resulted in the murder of 1,500 of the town's Jews. It was not the killing of the Jews that appeared to bother him, but rather the haphazard and unorganized manner in which they were committed. In fact, Hein took pride in the fact that, quote, when he was responsible for an action, the Jews were led to their graves in an orderly fashion. They were shot in an equally orderly fashion. There was no mess, end quote. During his stay in Mir, Hein's gendarmes, supported by indigenous police forces, conducted numerous actions aimed at the region's Jewish population and the local partisan movement. The anti-Jewish actions normally resulted in the murder of between 10 and 40 victims during a single action. In comparing the two types of operations, one eyewitness, Oswald Rufeisen, remembered a clear distinction between the former and the latter. According to Rufeisen, 3 gendarmes, including Hein, regularly avoided participation in anti-Jewish actions, while all policemen willingly joined in operations against partisans or those accused of partisan collaboration. In reality, this distinction often proved illusory, as Jews found during anti-partisan sweeps fell victim to the police, as did Jews who joined partisan forces. Likewise, Heinz supervised and directed anti-Jewish actions, even if he made an effort to avoid direct participation in the killing of defenseless persons. His men also remained diligent in tracking down and executing Jews, including 4 men and 2 women who were found in the woods in the wake of one such action. In this case, Heinz reported, quote, "They were summarily shot on the spot and properly buried in an especially suitable location," end quote. In this respect, Heinz remained true to the organization's values by enforcing the established practice of murder and atrocity. His actions mirrored a mentality that demanded toughness and a lack of compassion, but rejected sadism or taking pleasure in the infliction of pain, a mentality that Himmler himself promoted among his SS and police forces. In a case of Nazi through-the-looking-glass logic, the Reich leader of the SS wanted his men to commit murder, but for the quote-unquote right reasons and in an orderly fashion. Finally, the case of Ernst Schmidt provides another example of a gendarme who became routinely involved in murder and atrocity in the Polish general government. Born in 1907, Schmidt entered the Reichswehr in 1925 and remained in the military until his voluntary transfer to the gendarmerie in 1938. In late 1940, he received orders to report to a gendarmerie post to take charge of some 10 to 12 gendarmes and a number of Polish policemen. The post-war testimonies of Polish survivors demonstrate that Schmidt was a brutal man who killed without cause or compunction. For example, Morris Trost remembered several cases of Jews from the ghetto in Komarov being detailed by the gendarmerie for street cleaning duties. On numerous occasions, Schmidt arbitrarily shot Jews from these work details, a number exceeding 100 persons. Trost also witnessed Schmidt's execution of a Jewish man returning from services still wearing his prayer shawl, as well as the murder of another man who stepped outside his front door without the Star of David displayed on his clothing. Both Heinz and Schmidt's actions demonstrate the extent to which the boundaries of acceptable and desired behavior had been distorted even among isolated gendarmes operating in small groups with great autonomy. For these men, the message of annihilation transmitted in ideological indoctrination and in the organizational values and beliefs of the police appear to have found fertile soil. The senior SS and police leadership could only applaud their zeal and dedication, a fact made manifest in the nomination of Schmidt to receive a specially inscribed book during Yulefest ceremonies, the Nazi SS winter solstice celebration, in December 1932. In this presentation, I have offered a brief overview of the activities of the German police and their critical role in the conduct of genocide. During the war, the men of the Order Police killed over 500,000 men, women, and children, and perhaps as many as 1 million. Admittedly, the SS and police leadership, despite their best efforts, proved unable to establish a uniform and homogeneous body of members. However, they did succeed in creating an organizational culture within the police built upon the pillars of anti-Semitism and anti-Bolshevism, which progressively broadened the boundaries of acceptable and desired behavior. One manifestation of this organizational mindset appears in the statement of a policeman from Police Battalion 322 in response to a question as to why his unit killed Jews. He replied, quote, "Therefore the Jews, because it was preached to us at every training session that one needed to exterminate this race. They were guilty of all the evil in the world, and also for the outbreak of the war," end quote. Another policeman echoed this same thought and captured the organizational viewpoint of the majority of the police. Quote, "Although I am aware that it is the duty of the police to protect the innocent, I was, however, at the time, convinced that the Jewish people were not innocent, but guilty. I believed all the propaganda that Jews were criminals and subhuman. The thought that one should oppose or evade the order to take part in extermination of the Jews never entered my head either." Policemen serving with police battalions or at gendarmerie posts in the occupied East did have a choice. And when murder was on the agenda, there was always enough volunteers. In the end, it was not German culture, but the organizational culture of the police that helped transform civil servants into political soldiers of destruction. In discussing the Holocaust, one is often overwhelmed by the scale of atrocity and its horrific nature. To paraphrase a saying, a single death is a tragedy and a million is a statistic. However, there is a human face to genocide and an individual story that accompanied the death of each man, woman, and child. We may not know all these stories, but we can at least take a moment to remember some of their faces. I appreciate your attention this evening. Thank you.
Professor Western will be happy to entertain questions from the audience. So,
thank you. Yes, sir.
Do you feel there are any parallels between the militarization of the Iraqi police forces and what you just lectured? What are the boundaries that should be observed?
Well, in my class, for example, we have just got done looking at the French experience in Algeria and Mark Vanner's book, Torture and Truth, which deals with Abu Ghraib. In one, I think, can in fact draw parallels to organizations where the leadership it's more profound when the leadership has an agenda that they expressly pursue. It's, I think, also a case that leadership can abdicate control and allow that control to migrate down to lower levels, and where behavior can be radicalized as well. I do think that if you use the idea of organizational culture to set it as a mechanism for looking at an organization, that it could be applied, especially to other units. In this case, the Iraqi police would be a classic example of that. Yes?
At the end of the war, how did the German government go about developing a new police system to govern and protect people?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it involves two answers. Actually, East Germany did a pretty good job of eliminating people with a record of atrocity within their police forces. West Germany was by far not successful in doing that. In fact, the German police was not declared a criminal organization at Nuremberg. And so many of these policemen actually started continuing careers in the police after the war was over. And it's only in the 1960s, 1950s that you start to see some of the quotes that I have are from official testimony or interrogations that take place. But the problem in prosecuting many of these men is, number one, they're police officers, so they know the rules of evidence. They get their story straight together when one finds out, tipped off, that there's going to be an investigation. So it becomes very difficult to pin them down, because they know what they can and can't say. And when they're actually shown documents that prove complicity, then somebody will remember, oh yeah, I wasn't on vacation that week. Oh, I was forced to stand, to help people get to the execution site, but I wasn't there, I didn't see anything. I don't know who in my unit was at the execution site. And what's surprising is every once in a while, going through these piles of testimony, you'll find people who say, yeah, just like those quotes that I used at the end of the talk, who admitted that they were part and parcel of this. But it becomes very difficult to get them. Many of them stay in the criminal police, stay in the police, and retire, with a pension in West Germany as well. Austria, the same example. There's no dumb question. Yes, please. Yes, ma'am.
Does it help in a society, rather than having appointed police departments that are political, does it help in a society then to have elected officials?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure that I'm really the person to answer that. I think I think what's most important is if you have this charter to protect and to serve, but when you start seeing behavior that transcends those boundaries, then it's time to take action. That would be my understanding. Yes?
So in reality, the vast majority of worker police would have been party members.
Well, actually, for the police officers, the numbers for police officers, not for the enlisted corps, the numbers were right about 70%. So, which is extremely high relative to other groups, as a matter of fact. What Chris Browning's book talked about was this reserve police battalion. And in the meantime, if you look at some of these 300 battalions I've been talking about, they were a much different mix. Younger, I kept giving you the dates of when these people were born. And there's a so-called war youth generation. And if you look at some of the ages of these men who were especially adept or committed to this, you see that they were socialized under National Socialism, right? And that was extremely important. You know, in the case of Kutzfeld, we have an older gentleman, right? And one of the things that DeLuca and Himmler both do is they say, you're going to send people to the East, make sure they're under the age of about 40, right? They have specific guidelines as well as to who they send. So in fact, actually the police as an organization have some of the highest representation of party membership. SS membership is a different story. 30% of the police officers in 1941 regular police officers are SS members. About 7% of the reservists officers. That's a little bit lower. Question to that?
Yeah, it seems like you agree with Browning. I don't know a lot about this. What
Okay.
he explained is that these police officers, it's not like they at the beginning were jumping on this bandwagon, but were rather created into these monsters. Am I correct in assuming this?
Well, I think where Chris and I had talked about this, where we kind of, he said you kind of looked at an aspect that he said he had to consider, this idea of organizational culture. We are both looking at situational aspects, socialization processes. Now, where I do in my book, for example, which I didn't do as much here, I do think ideology matters to these people, right? And sometimes people think there's a caricature of ideology. If you weren't, raising your hand in the Hitler salute every 5 minutes and clicking your heels, you didn't believe in the precepts of National Socialism. Well, I think ideology works a lot differently than that in my mind. We all have basic ideas about what we think is fair and democratic. Where do those ideas come from? Well, they come from partly from our socialization and our experience, but I think ideology in many respects works in that same way. It can be a latent process where you don't have to be expressing commitment to Hitler every 15 minutes to be committed to National Socialist ideas. That's my personal opinion. There are many people who would disagree with that.
Well, okay. Along with that, in that case, do you feel that it is important for both the police and the military, your everyday soldier, to question whether this is right or wrong? I mean, in current situations or in past situations, questioning is what, or the blind obedience that's so fundamental. I mean, do you think questioning is important?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And there's a thing, in the military that we're always taught, what are legal and illegal orders, right?
Okay.
And if the answer is we have 5 suspected insurgents here, we don't want to take them down to prison, let's get rid of them, that's an illegal order, okay? Or we've got some prisoners here, let's rough them up, right? That's an illegal order. You have a responsibility in the military to not only not do that, not follow that order, but you have a responsibility to report that situation. Now, does it get sometimes into gray zones? It obviously is going to. One point that your question does raise, though, after the war, many of the police said, well, if I didn't do it, they were going to kill me, right? So I had to do it or they were going to shoot me. There's not one single case that can be documented of an SS or policeman being shot for refusing to kill people. Now, did SS and police officers get executed for other things, stealing, wanton brutality in some cases, where it was either involving sexual assaults against women, things like that. Yes, there are people that are executed for those types of crimes, but nobody's executed because they said, I can't do this. I can't kill innocent people. Yes?
A lot of times I've heard talk about like a Lord of the Flies syndrome. A lot of the SS officers seem to be younger when they started, kind of just feeding off of each other's bad behavior.
Yeah, you know, Philip Zimbardo, who did the prison experiments, has a new book out. It's called The Lucifer Effect. And he doesn't talk about bad apples. He talks about a bad barrel, if you will. And in some cases, if your question, I think, raises a good point in the sense that is the bad barrel, is the organizational culture, could be one way of looking at the barrel itself, right? That barrel is actually crafted by those who are in charge, the limits that they place on police. So, and again, this is obviously a huge debate. I'm giving you one idea of what I think after 13 years of studying the police, my impression of why this is happening. But there are certainly other ways of looking at it. I'm sorry, can I take that one? And then I'll come over here.
What was the reason for Hitler and Heinrich to take all the time and try to convert the police into this military effort? Why couldn't they just use a branch of the military or the military officers to conduct this annihilation?
That's an excellent question. And what they were trying to do is they needed reliable forces, right? And in Poland, for example, there's complicity with the Wehrmacht in the execution of Jews and of Poles, clergy members, aristocracy. There is some pushback from the Wehrmacht, but it's not a pushback that's based on moral grounds. Okay, this is an important point. They aren't saying if we're doing the wrong thing, this is immoral. They're saying it's not good for discipline and good order for our soldiers to be doing this. And oh, by the way, we're seeing what some of these SS and police units are doing. It's a corrupting influence, right? Now, by the time we get to 1941 in the Soviet Union, the Wehrmacht is completely on board in many cases. The Wehrmacht and the police cooperate in a number of actions, mass murder and atrocity. So part of the answer to your question is the police were seen as a key part of Himmler's, the SS and police, of maintaining control of Germany in the first place after Hitler takes power. So consolidating control over the police, as you would imagine, is important. As we see in any totalitarian dictatorship, right, the police and secret police are key instruments for maintaining that control. But they also become key instruments then for enforcing the racial persecution that takes place in the war itself later. And they are seen as kind of trusted agents, if you will, of the regime. We can count on these men to do it. I think I had a question over here. Okay, yes, please. We'll just go in order. Yes.
I'm assuming that there were some of these men that mentally were not psychologically able to handle this on and on. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and again, you all, I don't know which classes you're in, but you're asking some excellent questions. Himmler recognizes that this takes a psychological toll. Walking up behind men, women, and children and putting a bullet in the back of their head from about 3 feet away is tough. And it's not only tough for those who are committed, you end up with literally the blood of the brain matter of that individual splattered on these policemen's tongues, right? So he realizes that even the standard that he's trying to establish, that policemen and men can't do that over a longer period of time. So he looks for other ways to do this. And in the case of gas bans, for example, are introduced. So, and he also says, every man is probably going to reach their limits at one point. As long as they've gone to that point, however, then it's okay. You can pull them back. I use that through the looking glass logic. And again, he wants people to kill for the right reasons and in the right way. And it's hard for us to understand that way of thinking. But that's that kind of answers that question in my mind. And so they do look for other ways as a reaction to that. And policemen who can no longer hack it, Okay, that's not a big deal. We can move them into another role. We can have somebody else fill in. The other question back?
You mentioned the Weimar being on board when they crossed into Russia in 1942. So for the generation 1950 took about 25 years. Is that all it really takes to brainwash a generation?
I don't know if it takes that long to brainwash them. You can certainly socialize a generation, I think. And you have to understand that the nature of totalitarian regimes, for example, education is a key method of socialization. In the sense of how the National Socialists look at the education system. We can look at North Korea as another example of educational socialization. We can look at other totalitarian regimes. And certainly, if you have a committed cadre and you have the message, and that message is constantly reinforced, will it have an effect? And my answer to that is obviously I believe that's the case.
Just one more question. You gave the birthdays of many of the young men that were groomed into this culture and participated in it. Were the young girls groomed in the same culture and the same way?
Yeah, there's Elizabeth Harvey has a new book out, Yale PhD, Nazi Women in the East, and she talks about this. Now, the socialization process, the ideal image for the woman in National Socialism is the mother is the bearer of children. It's not supposed to be instruments, let's say, of annihilation, if you will. So it's a different type of role that women are put into, socialized into. But in my mind, that socialization process is also profoundly respectful. Yes.
Yeah, I read The Willing Executioners when it first came out, and I didn't completely buy it, but I'm trying to make sense of the whole thing. After in the last few decades, when our soldiers come back from different wars, a lot of them suffer, this post-traumatic stress.
Right.
Is there any evidence that those individuals that were in these killing units after the war, did they suffer any of this? Because I don't get any sense that they did, and that the only feeling they had was perhaps relief that they haven't gotten caught.
Well, the answer is there are some cases, for example, of suicide after the war within these groups when prosecutors go to look for people. How much of that is related to them dealing with the psychological effects of their experience? I don't know. I think that would be a great issue to look at. I have not looked at that issue, and what I think it would require is to identify those specific individuals and then literally target that individual or those individuals that you are able to identify.
Which certainly would be difficult at this.
Well, the Germans have what they know as Datschutz-Gesetz, which is, for example, as I have to use pseudonyms for the last names of a number of these individuals because they were just interrogated or questioned with respect to their participation. And so you have to sign an agreement that you're not going to put these people's names out there. Now, if they were actually indicted, then it's okay to use it. But again, I think that would be potentially, people have looked at this idea of post-war justice within the police. Were these people held to account? But nobody's really looked at that specific aspect of it. So we've got some grad students here that like German. This might be a great competition.
Well, what about the role of the secret police? Were they coercive? Were they cooperative? Did the police themselves feel that if they didn't follow official orders, that they were subject to censure? And before find that often actions happen that are different than reality.
Well,
I just want to
yeah, I understand. Well, what you will see, for example, is in these units when I'm reading these testimonies, if somebody is unwilling to do that, does that person get off scot-free? Well, it's kind of like, in any team, I look like I got a football player here or something like that. It looks like this person's shirking, that there are informal ways of, okay, run some laps, go get the water for the rest of the guys, call in names. Does that stuff happen? Absolutely. So you do see an authorization, and there are, for example, NCOs or non-commissioned officers who will say, okay, who hasn't shot yet? Okay, you've never shot anybody. Guess what? It's your turn. You're going to at least be one. Okay, so you do have examples of that. Now, is it do you take somebody out and shoot them because they won't shoot people? I have not seen any evidence of that. But there are these other informal mechanisms, obviously, that Chris Browning also talks about. Those people who are non-conformers.
I'm going to read at this point. You have to be our SCS. If you want to get some more details on this theme, the bookstore is kind enough to bring some copies of his book down in the lobby, which you're welcome to purchase. Otherwise, let's thank you for listening.
Just accept it. Keep on doing what you're doing.